You think losing your job happens because you're late, because you messed up, because you didn't fit the company culture. But what if I told you it could happen for doing the right thing, for pulling over on a dark highway to help a stranger fix his bike? No money involved, no shady deal, just handing over a wrench and a flashlight. And the next week, you're sitting across from your boss being told you're a liability, that your reputation is toxic, that you're finished, all because of the patch on the back of the man you helped. Sounds insane, right? A veteran helps a Hell's Angel rider and loses his job. You've probably scrolled past headlines like that before. Except this time it wasn't a headline. It wasn't a rumor. It was my life. My name is Jake, and if you've got a few minutes, I'll tell you how one act of kindness pulled me into a world I never expected, and how what happened next changed everything. I was 34 when it happened, 2 years back from Afghanistan. I'd served 2 tours, came home with a handful of medals and a head full of memories I didn't ask for. Like a lot of veterans, I struggled to find where I fit once the uniform came off. Civilian life didn't make sense. People worried about traffic or late Amazon packages, while I woke up sweating from dreams of sandstorms and explosions. The only work I could land was a night security job in a warehouse that smelled like cardboard and chemicals. It wasn't much, but it paid the bills. Barely. My nights were quiet, lonely, broken up by coffee and conversations with a vending machine that always stole my last dollar. That's where my life was at. Monotony, silence, and a sense that the best years had already been used up. Then one night I was driving home, half dead from boredom when I saw it. A motorcycle limping on the shoulder, chrome dull under the streetlights, its rider crouched low, fighting with something. I slowed down, squinted through the windshield, and that's when I noticed the patch. Skull, wings, the letters Hell's Angels across the back of his jacket. My stomach tightened, not out of fear exactly, but because I knew the reputation. Every news story painted those 3 words as danger, trouble, outlaw. Most people would have kept driving, telling themselves it wasn't their problem. But veterans aren't wired like that. We don't leave someone stranded. I pulled over anyway. I grabbed my flashlight, walked up, and asked, "Need a hand?" He looked up, beard streaked with gray, eyes sharp but tired. He gave me a look like he was deciding if I was serious or if I was about to mouth off and drive away. Finally, he sighed and said, "Chain's shot, been fighting with it for an hour." So I crouched down. The asphalt was rough under my knees, the air heavy with the smell of hot rubber. We worked together in silence at first, passing tools back and forth. Slowly, he started talking about his kids, about the fundraiser ride the club was planning for a children's hospital, about how hard it was to keep a bike running these days. His voice didn't sound like the monster people imagined when they heard Hell's Angel. It just sounded like a tired father, a man trying to keep things together. When we finally got the chain set and the bike roared to life, he stood and offered his hand. Didn't think anyone would stop. "Appreciate it, brother." His handshake was firm, calloused, grateful. I got back in my car, feeling like I'd just done what anyone should do, helped another human being. But that decision, that simple handshake, ended up costing me more than I could have ever imagined. The next day, I was called into my supervisor's office. The room smelled like burnt coffee and cheap carpet cleaner. He looked uncomfortable, like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Jake, we've had some concerns raised about your associations." I frowned. "Associations?" He tapped his pen against a stack of papers. "Someone reported seeing you with a member of the Hells Angels. That's not the image we want representing this company." I laughed, thinking he had to be joking. "I helped a guy fix his chain. That's it. I don't associate with anyone." But it didn't matter. In his mind, and in the mind of whoever made the complaint, I was guilty by proximity. By the end of the week, I was cleaning out my locker, carrying a cardboard box of my belongings to the car. No thanks for my service. No second chances. Just tossed aside because I happened to help the wrong guy. At first, I was furious. After everything I'd done, after all the loyalty and discipline I'd lived by, this was my reward. To be branded a liability because of one act of kindness. But anger doesn't pay rent. Anger doesn't fill the fridge. So I sat in my apartment, staring at unpaid bills, wondering what the hell I was supposed to do now. That's when I heard it. the low rumble of engines outside. I looked out the window and saw them. 3 bikes, lined up like steel horses, chrome gleaming in the fading light. At the front was the rider I'd helped. He knocked on my door, helmet dangling from his hand, and grinned. "Heard what happened. Thought we'd check in on you." I didn't know what to say. I half expected trouble, but his tone wasn't threatening. It was sincere. He introduced himself as Ray. He told me he wanted to invite me out, not to a bar, not to anything sketchy, but to a cookout. I almost said no. The last thing I needed was to get pulled deeper into something that could ruin me further. But there was something in his voice, steady and genuine, that made me say yes. That Saturday, I walked into a park filled with laughter, smoke from barbecues, and the sound of kids chasing each other between rows of motorcycles. Families everywhere. Wives, girlfriends, children. A donation jar on a table labeled Veterans Housing Fund. Boxes of toys for kids in the hospital. I stood there stunned. This wasn't what the news described. This wasn't the chaos and menace painted in headlines. This was community. And for the first time since leaving the military, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Nobody looked at me like a broken veteran. Nobody judged me. They welcomed me in. They listened to me. They treated me like a brother, but belonging comes with a price. Word spread fast. My former boss heard about the cookout, told others in the industry not to hire me. Old friends stopped calling. At the grocery store, people whispered behind my back. To them, I was guilty by association. But while one world pushed me away, another pulled me closer. Ray called again, inviting me to ride along in the support van for a charity run. Over 100 bikes filled the highway, engines roaring in unison like thunder. Not to intimidate, not to cause fear, but to raise money for kids in the hospital. Drivers pulled over to watch, children waved from sidewalks, families cheered as the convoy passed. I sat in the van, chest tight, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, pride. Not the kind you pin on a uniform, but pride in being part of something real. Something that mattered. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very act that cost me my job was giving me more purpose than that job ever had. And yet, I knew the outside world would never see it that way. They'd never report on the money raised, the kids helped, the families smiling. They'd just see the patches and repeat the same old stories. But I couldn't walk away. Every time the world tried to isolate me, the angels closed ranks. They never asked me to wear their patch. They never demanded loyalty beyond what I wanted to give. But they showed me what loyalty looked like when it was lived without question. Over the next few months, I saw things no news crew would bother filming. Angels repairing a widow's roof after a storm, delivering Christmas gifts to foster kids, sitting at the bedside of a veteran in the hospital. These weren't criminals in my eyes. They were men and women who lived by loyalty, by brotherhood, by community. It made me realize life isn't black and white. It never was. The truth lives in the gray, but truth has consequences. My landlord pulled me aside one day. "There have been complaints," he said stiffly. "Neighbors don't like the company you keep. If this keeps up, you'll have to find somewhere else." I stood there, holding back laughter that tasted like bitterness. I'd fought for freedom overseas, only to come home and be threatened with eviction for the crime of association. That's when I understood something. I could spend the rest of my life chasing acceptance from people who would never understand. Or I could stand with the only ones who had stood with me when everything else fell apart. And I knew exactly which road I was going to take. The decision was already made long before I admitted it to myself. You don't turn your back on the people who stand by you when the world spits you out. And Ray and his brothers, they had done more for me in weeks than the system had done in years. Still, I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew every step closer to them was a step further away from the kind of acceptance polite society demanded. But when has polite society ever been there for a man like me? It wasn't the clean-cut neighbors who checked in after I lost my job. It wasn't my old bosses who made sure I ate. It wasn't even the so-called veteran support networks that showed up when my rent came due. It was these men in leather vests, patches blazing, who looked at me not as a liability, but as a brother. The more time I spent around them, the more I saw the cracks between the reputation and the reality. To outsiders, the Hell's Angels were a menace. To the people at those charity rides, they were saviors. I remember one day in particular. We were parked outside a children's hospital, a row of bikes lined up like sentinels. Nurses brought kids down in wheelchairs, Roman 4 poles rattling as they rolled. Their faces lit up when they saw the bikes, like they'd just stepped into a superhero movie. Ray handed one boy a miniature leather vest with angel wings stitched on the back. The kid slipped it on and grinned like he'd just been knighted. You can't fake that kind of joy. No one can tell me that wasn't real. But while we were bringing happiness to kids, the cops were circling. Unmarked cars, uniforms watching from across the street. To them, we weren't men doing good. We were suspects waiting to slip up. That was the part I struggled with most, knowing that no matter what good I witnessed, the outside world would never see it. The media didn't want stories of bikers fixing roofs or feeding families. They wanted mugshots, flashing lights, drama. And anyone associated, even a veteran like me, got painted with the same brush. It caught up with me sooner than I thought. I'd been picking up odd jobs, painting houses, hauling junk, whatever I could do to scrape together rent. One afternoon, a customer pulled me aside after I finished moving boxes for her. She looked nervous, eyes darting toward my beat-up sedan parked by the curb. "I'm sorry," she said, "but we can't have you back. My husband saw who you've been spending time with." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. All I'd done was help people, raise money, lend my hands where they were needed. But the patch burned brighter than anything else in their minds, even if I wasn't wearing it myself. Ray told me not to worry. "The more they push you out, the more you'll realize who your real family is," he said. And he was right. With every rejection, every slammed door, the angels drew me closer in. They never made promises they couldn't keep. They never pretended the world wasn't stacked against them, but what they did promise was loyalty. And in a life where everything else had been stripped away that meant more than gold, then came the turning point. A storm rolled through town, knocking out power, tearing shingles off rooftops, flooding basements. One of the hardest hit houses belonged to a widow, her husband a Marine who never came back from Iraq. The roof was leaking, water pouring in. Ray got the call, and within hours, a crew of bikers was hauling tarps, hammering plywood, climbing ladders in the rain. I was right there with them, hammer in hand, soaked to the bone, but feeling alive in a way I hadn't since my deployment days. The widow cried when we finished. Not polite tears, but the raw sobs of someone who thought she'd been forgotten and then realized she wasn't. That night, as we sat dripping wet in Ray's garage, sharing beers and laughter, I realized something. For the first time in years, I felt like I was back in a unit again. A team, a family, but of course, nothing good comes without a price. The very next week, a police cruiser pulled me over on my way home. The officer leaned into my window, shining his flashlight in my eyes like I was already guilty. "You Jake Miller?" he asked. My gut twisted. He didn't care about a busted taillight. He wanted to make a point. He warned me about the company I was keeping, told me I was on a watch list now. I tried to explain. I wasn't patched in, I wasn't committing crimes, I was just helping out at charity events. But he didn't hear any of it. To him, I was already gone. I drove home that night with my hands shaking on the wheel, realizing how fast my name was sliding into a category I hadn't chosen. And yet, every time I thought about pulling away, I thought about the widow's roof, about the kids at the hospital, about the way the angels treated me when no one else would. I thought about the nights when the silence of my apartment was broken not by nightmares, but by the laughter of brothers who made me feel like I belonged. You don't walk away from that, not when you've been alone as long as I had. The hardest blow came a month later. My landlord made good on his threat. "Too many complaints," he said flatly, handing me a notice. "You'll have to move out." I stood there in the doorway, staring at the paper, feeling the weight of the world pressing down. I'd fought for this country, given years of my life to it, and here I was, jobless, homeless, discarded, because I'd chosen loyalty over perception. Ray didn't let me fall. He showed up with a pickup truck, helped me load my things, and brought me to a spare room in his house. His wife cooked dinner for me that night, no questions asked, no judgment in her eyes. Just a plate of food, a chair at the table, and the quiet kind of kindness I hadn't felt in years. That was the night I stopped seeing them as the Hell's Angels and started seeing them as family. And here's the part no one ever tells you. Once you've been truly accepted into a circle like that, the world outside looks different. The men I met weren't angels, but they weren't demons either. They were human. Flawed, scarred, sometimes reckless, but bound by loyalty in a way the so-called respectable people never were. And me, I realized I'd rather be judged for standing with the only ones who stood with me than be praised by a world that abandoned me. I didn't join them officially. I didn't wear a patch, but I rode with them, I worked beside them, I bled and sweated with them. And the more I did, the more I understood something I wish I'd known sooner. That life isn't about who the world tells you to avoid. It's about who shows up when you're down. It's about who helps you fix your roof in a storm, who checks on you when you've lost your job, who makes sure you're not alone when the night gets too heavy. For me, that wasn't my boss, my neighbors, or even my so-called friends. It was Ray. It was the angels. It was the men in patches who most people cross the street to avoid. People love to say I ruined my life that night on the highway. That if I'd just driven past, I'd still have my job, my apartment, my clean name. Maybe they're right. Maybe I traded safety for loyalty. But what they don't understand is that safety isn't life. Safety is just existing. And I didn't fight overseas, I didn't bleed for this country just to come back and spend my days existing. I wanted to live, and for the first time in years I was. What happened next really did change everything. Because once you've been burned by the system and saved by the outlaws, you stop caring about what the world thinks. You stop asking for permission to belong. And you start building your life on the only thing that actually matters: loyalty.